we've had customers in certain areas that kind of rushed to the cloud, and they moved into the cloud space, and that was extremely important for them, and the cloud has been a great key factor. I think to some degree they oversteered and swung the pendulum in one direction. We had a hospital system that was involved and kind of decided to move everything to the cloud, and over time their different organizations would spin up GPUs, spin up different servers, certain systems, and their operational costs kind of got a bit out of hand. So they actually pulled back and brought some of that technology back in house, so they can manage and maintain it. I think the real answer is it's a blended balance. This is Dave Irek with Duos Edge AI, and you've been watching the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and I'm thrilled to have a very special guest joining me today. I'm with Dave Irek, who is VP of Business Development with Duos Edge AI. The company's headquartered in Jacksonville, Florida. Dave's based in Texas. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Joshua.
I appreciate you joining me. So, super curious for our guests, if you could give me a little bit of background of how you ended up in your current role leading business development for Duos Edge AI, and a little bit of background on what Duos Edge AI is for our viewers, listeners who may not be familiar with the company.
Sure. I'm glad to do that. So it's kind of an interesting story. The majority of my career I've been focused around transport and transport technologies, and been in the fiber optics industry for a long time, basically back since the mid 80s, involved in some of the very first transport equipment. But about a year ago, I met Doug Recker, the founder of Duos Edge AI. He actually has a background in data center. He built 2 large brick and mortar facilities in Florida, sold those to Cologix in the mid-teens of the 2000s, and then started up a company called Edge Presence, and ran that for a while, sold that in 2023, and then last year started up Duos Edge AI. I got introduced to Doug through a mutual friend in the industry. We actually worked kind of collaboratively with my previous company, which I was focused heavily around the education, municipal, higher education space. So we got introduced there. He and I hit it off, and in March of this year, I joined Doug and the rest of the team at Duos. And as they say, the rest of the story, Duos Edge is basically building edge data centers for, and our primary focus is around rural and tier 3 to what we refer to as tier 3, tier 4 markets. They can be obviously placed anywhere, but we've seen a need in the remote territories, smaller communities, and our first deployment happened to be in concert with the Regional Education Service Center in Amarillo, Texas. So that's our first deployment, but we've got plans to deploy 15 more, or 15 total, by the end of this year throughout Texas and the Southwest.
So I first came across the idea of edge data centers maybe about 10 years ago, and it's clear that there's all these applications now that people may not have even been thinking about as recently as 3, 4, 5 years ago with AI and high performance computing. I'm curious, you've had a long career in and around telecommunications. How did you first come across edge computing?
So I've been obviously from an edge computing perspective. It's interesting, even in the education space, the amount of compute that various entities use have been obviously driving solutions to interconnect data centers, primarily big brick and mortar facilities. The concept of edge, at least for me, is a little bit new, but as you said, there was markings of that as long as 10 years ago, and like I said, Doug had started up Edge Presence several years back, and obviously saw a need and a niche for that. It was interesting. I was actually at ITW this week and listening to several presentations from some of the industry leaders, especially around high-end computing, the likes of IBM, D6, on the edge, on the large data center scale, and even companies like Nokia all talking about the massive growth that we're seeing, not only from the hyperscalers, but converged cloud, and pushing more and more things out to the edge. And we're seeing that obviously as an area for us to focus on, but we're seeing a need for edge computing to get that experience closer and closer to the end users. And we're seeing a massive amount of interest around that. And the resounding theme from all of those players was there is a need to push compute further and further out to the edge. And of course, as AI becomes more pervasive, it's really about how do you ensure the experience, and that's all about managing low latency and content-based solutions. And the closer you can get that to the end user, what we refer to as the end eyeballs that are going to be utilizing, whether it's an edge compute device, a handheld, our mobile devices. Everybody wants a better experience, and the edge compute is going to be, I think, a key factor in that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense with all the trends, consumption patterns, all the consumerization now almost seeming like old school, but the hyperscalers, all the trends around getting the data closer, all the latency sensitive applications. I'm curious too, when you think about what led you down this path to be where you are in your career, you spend most of your career around the transport side of telecommunications. Was that something that you thought about when you're in your formative years growing up as a teen or early school years? Or were there things that happened that set you on this path to be where you are in the later stages?
So it's funny you asked. I was actually somewhat indoctrinated. I have an older brother that when I was 13 years old, I was actually a lab rat for him at a company at that time was called Collins Radio. Many people knew it. It became Rockwell International, and then got acquired by Alcatel. But he was one of the very first ASICs developers, specifically around some of the very first fiber optic muxes. So I didn't know what fiber meant, but he started indoctrinating me at the age of 13. And I was literally running around the lab helping him out during summers as a middle schooler into high school, just learning the technology. I learned how to calculate a T1 probably when I was about 15 before I knew how to do algebra. And it's been interesting. It was certainly something that set me on the career path. I went more or less the sales, business development, and kind of technical sales track for the majority of my career. He was more on the development side, and he always encouraged me to move closer to the marketing and sales side, just based on his experience, and just thought I would enjoy it more. But that's pretty much where I've been most of my career. Moving into the data center side, quite honestly, it wasn't something I saw myself doing. But when Doug and I met and we realized the convergence that's occurring in so many different entities, and the need for what we're bringing, it wasn't as big of a leap as I thought. I will admit that I was probably one of the later adopters to AI, specifically using things like ChatGPT and Grok and those others. But when I joined Doug, I realized I had to come up to speed quickly, and it's help close that gap and bring me up to speed. So it's been interesting to be a consumer of the technology that we're supporting and trying to drive further out to the end users.
Yeah, I've seen over the last couple of years, there's increasingly this coming together of business models with colocation operators getting more involved in managed services, and a lot taking a much more active role in the carrier neutrality part of their data centers, offering a lot more choice simply because their clients are requiring it, and opens up a lot more opportunities. So similar kind of idea to what led to Duo's Edge AI, just really being tuned into what clients are responding to, market demands, and building something that I didn't realize you mentioned it either, that the big motivation and growth of being able to extend to secondary, not beyond even secondary communities, to tertiary, like tier 3, tier 4 kind of communities, getting this access out into rural areas.
Well, what's really been interesting for me is learning, and my wife and I we have I'll call it a hobby ranch. We have a handful of cattle. We moved out to the country just more or less to get some space, but we have some cows, and as a result, you start learning kind of the agricultural way. And we've met several people around us that are have what I consider real ranches. 3, 4, 5,000 head of cattle. What's really interesting is how they're utilizing technology and the importance of pushing AI and pushing compute capabilities further and further out in the edge. I have local ranchers that are using drones to be able to keep track of their cattle. So if they're losing cattle, or even to the point of during calving season, they're using technology to be able to track new calves on the ground, and ways to do that. It's between that, and then if you look at entities like John Deere, they're launching completely autonomous tractors and farm equipment that can be run through the fields without being manned on each device. It can improve performance and productivity. The agricultural side of things is based on what we found in Amarillo and the Panhandle, that is a huge driver around the need for connectivity out into the rural areas and being able to support those types of technologies.
Yeah, it's one of these sectors of the economy that people don't necessarily think of as being tech enabled. But yeah, I heard the same thing a couple of years ago with like Cat and John Deere putting IoT onto their tractors so they can run all kinds of analytics predictions on what's going to happen next. Every once in a while, I come across a SaaS company that's focused on agritech. So yeah, it makes sense. They need great connectivity all the way down into areas that traditionally may have been neglected by the big carriers.
Yeah, it's much more pervasive. And going back to your previous question about the need for giving customers options, it's not only the option of having multiple co-location options, but also multiple pathways. We've had incidences where we've had fiber cuts in certain parts of the state where there's been multiple locations isolated, multiple school districts isolated during testing, and that becomes a challenge. It's interesting, internet's become this, I call it the second utility, because everyone takes water for granted. We shouldn't, but everybody does take water for granted because it's everywhere, and everybody kind of takes electricity for granted to a certain degree. But when you're looking at any type of facility, whether it's somebody buying a new home somewhere, I know when we bought this facility, the ranch that we're on, we looked at two things. What does the power look like? Who's the power provider, and does it have internet? And if it didn't, you had to calculate into that. How do I get fiber or some type of technology? And of course, that was all before Starlink, which that's changing things significantly well in the rural areas. But I think with what we're doing on the edge data center, and especially with our partnering with the education front, is many educational entities have multiple carriers. That when I say multiple, that means more than one. And oftentimes they'll have at least two, sometimes three. And by placing that there, that becomes an on-ramp to what can be a much larger connectivity back into major cities. So by providing those on-ramps in rural areas, now entities have the ability to get access to back to the larger facilities in Dallas or Austin or Chicago or wherever they may be, in rural parts of America.
Yeah, I know that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned schools and you mentioned rural, which brings me to one of the questions that I'm always curious about. If you were approached by someone who's in high school, thinking about college, thinking about careers, or maybe even younger, I see increasingly some school districts encouraging students to start exploring academies and interests, even in middle school and junior high. If you were to have a conversation with a neighbor, friend, family members, teen, about what some of the career opportunities look like in telecommunications and IT infrastructure, especially if you found out that they were not interested so much in engineering or development, but saw themselves more in a client-facing role, kind of like where you've built your career, sales, customer success, marketing, product. What would you talk about with that individual over coffee, over breakfast?
Yeah, so throughout my career, I've gone through a couple of what I call the ups and the downs. But I lived through the '90s boom when it was. We used to joke, it's if you have a pulse, we'll hire you. because we're not very proactive as an industry, especially in the 90s. I don't think anybody ever anticipated the .com explosion going through the end of the 90s and into the early 2000s, and what was going to happen, and all the different CLECs that came on board and brought competition. The industry as a whole was not ready. And I know at the time I was working with a couple of different entities. I worked for Ciena, and then I worked with a small startup called Cerent that got acquired by Cisco. And one of the things we started doing very actively is obviously going to colleges and recruiting, but we even started earlier than that. And I think studies show if you're not talking to middle school kids, at least getting them in the direction of wanting to go towards a technology focus. And it doesn't necessarily mean they have to decide, in fourth grade I'm going to be an engineer. It's more, do I want to go more towards something that's technology minded, and whether that's a business development sales engineering role, which is the track that I took, or go into something a little bit more hands-on to where you're going to deploy and support customers from that standpoint. It does start, it's about starting early. And that's one of the things that we're excited about with working with the educational entities. And one of the biggest factors that all of the the local municipalities and just the communities as a whole is they're shrinking typically in these rural areas because they don't have opportunities for their students to stay. So they typically go through their programs, and then they may go to college, and then they oftentimes don't come back until much later in life. That's one of the exciting things about what we're seeing, not only in our space with the edge compute, but what's going on with the hyperscalers and the data center that are going into these really pretty remote areas, places outside of Abilene, outside of Midland. We're looking to deploy or build a large scale facility just south of Pampa, Texas, which is pretty remote. And our plan is to reach out to the local high schools and start getting them involved in creating basically a data center academy, so that we can educate these kids, learn how to work and develop a career, a high paying career that within the data center, whether it's on the support side or whether they're there to try to reach out to customers and sell capacity within these facilities. But those are things that I would encourage. When I talk to students, especially younger kids, if they're if they're hands-on oriented, if they like to do stuff with computers, obviously moving into a data center field, certainly something of interest, or the telecom field, that's served me extremely well. And that's kind of how I started. I started out very hands-on at first, get some of the experience, and then transitioned more into the sales and business development side. But we definitely have to encourage kids to get involved much earlier.
Yeah, I've seen the same trend in our community with my own kids that are both in their teens, and seeing that we're in the area of South Florida with a huge school district. I think it's a top 10 or top 20 school district in the country. And as early as like fifth grade going into sixth grade, they start with these academies. They have like an IT academy, a healthcare academy, an engineering academy. So kids that are 10, 11 years old already starting to potentially get tracked.
Yeah, when I went to Texas A&M and got a degree in engineering. When we were there, I was involved in the engineering student council. We got because A&M is one of the space grant colleges, and part of and as a feeder entity into NASA. We got involved with the NASA Space Camp, and we created something that was new, because they've always had the NASA Space Camp, but it was really geared for high school students to potentially go into a college degree, go to the MITs, go to the high-end engineering schools, and then feed into NASA. But we actually started we called it a NASA Space Camp, and we did it for a week during the summer, and brought in middle school kids to A&M and got them and did projects. We did bridge building projects. We did different things, but we started in the middle school to get them interested in the STEM, the STEM type programs.
We talk about sometimes in sales and marketing, the buyer's journey. It's almost like the career journey, and trying to get there in the formative, the awareness stage and the consideration stage before they get to the point where everyone's going on college tours and figuring out what scores they need to hit with their SATs and GPAs. And no, it's actually probably starting 3, 4, 5 years before that.
Yeah, it's I look back, it's become so competitive It's so competitive to get into schools nowadays. I joke with my friends that I all went to college with. I'm like, I don't think I could get back into the my university again. I didn't have quite the same grades or the expectations they have now. So it's highly competitive, and if they don't start early and they start later, oftentimes they're left behind, and that's something I also try to encourage is those kids, get them involved earlier.
So, Dave, I imagine by this stage of your career, you've had a lot of great teams and companies you've worked with, a lot of former coworkers. If you were to bump into someone at a conference or airport or something like that you worked with 10, 15 years ago that you used to be really close with, you haven't seen them in a while, and as you're catching up, you sense that they're a little bit burned out, and they're asking you for advice to help them reset, pivot, kind of get their career back on track, staying in a similar kind of field as yourself in some aspect of infrastructure or telecommunications or data center, something on the client facing side. What would you talk about with that individual to help guide them?
So I've kind of been through a few of those burnout phases. I had a couple while I was with one particular company, and it was a big enough company that I was able to make a pretty radical change internal to the organization. The thing I did is I reached out to the leadership there and said, "Look, I feel like I'm at a point where I've hit a stalemate, and I'm not adding any value to the company. Is there something I can do internally that opens up doors? But if you're at a kind of at that dead end, I will say that the data center field right now, it's really exploding. I'll be honest. This is almost reminiscent of what we saw in the 90s, but maybe even to a larger scale in terms of what the hyperscalers are doing, what the data centers and the pro, if you look at the forecast for the future and what needs to be built over the next 10 years, it's absolutely mind blowing. It's hard to even wrap your head around. So I'd certainly encourage folks that, some of my peers, and it's funny, I ran into several of them at ITW, guys that I hadn't seen in 10, 15 years. And they have moved on, and, we talked and reminisce about some of those things. I would definitely say that, certainly look at, other fields and other options. I'm doing it, having transitioned from the transport side and moving more into the data center. And I'm really enjoying it and learning a lot. I feel like I'm drinking from the fire hose at times, but it is exciting. It's exciting times again. Like I said, it's very reminiscent of what we saw in the 90s. I'm thinking we could certainly see that type of renaissance again in technology. And I would say it's a great opportunity to look at other areas for sure.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Dave, when you think about the kinds of clients that you work with on a regular basis, what do you feel is the biggest problem or challenge or that they're dealing with, or biggest potential mistake that you want to help steer them around?
So some of the challenges obviously is, and I'll kind of break it down into a few different areas. We've had customers in certain areas that kind of rushed to the cloud, and they moved into the cloud space, and that was extremely important for them, and the cloud has been a great key factor. I think to some degree they oversteered and swung the pendulum in one direction. We had a hospital system that was involved and kind of decided to move everything to the cloud, and over time their different organizations would spin up GPUs, spin up different servers, certain systems, and their operational costs kind of got a bit out of hand. So they actually pulled back and brought some of that technology back in house so they could manage and maintain it. I think the real answer is it's a blended balance. for the education community, we're seeing, the amount of cost that they're having to go through to maintain their own facilities and their own data centers is pretty expensive, and that's where an entity like Duos Edge comes in. We formed a partnership relationship with the educational customers that we're looking at so far, and our goal and model with this is as we work with educational entities, we're working on revenue share models to where we can help them offset some of their costs and subsidize it so that they're not managing an infrastructure that's an expensive endeavor to manage, and yet they're gaining the benefits of having an N+1 tier 2 SOC 2 compliant facility that they can do a lot more with. As far as other mistakes, I think planning appropriately and really researching and understanding what is needed and the expenses associated with either building your own data center and making sure you're picking the right solutions. Those are things that I see oftentimes customers make the mistakes. I had one situation, and it's somewhat people get into their own silos, and through my career as a transport person, I only really cared about how do I connect one building to the other. I didn't really care what happened inside of the data center. I just know I needed to get a connection from that building to another building. In the data center world, a lot of those folks look at everything within inside the four walls to make sure they've got the redundant power, all of the environmental, the cooling, all those sorts of things, and the assets, and they make sure that they've got a very high class environments, very secure. In one particular case, we were working with a customer, and they had just bought a brand new ACI solution for data center aggregation and data center management, and they leased space from a data center provider. They had all the equipment shipping in, and I was looking at all the diagrams, and I was like, how are you connecting the two together? And it was just silence in the room. Apparently it was just an oversight, but nobody had thought about how to connect from the customer's existing facility to this brand new shiny data center. So they had to scramble and put out an RFP to request connectivity services, and that delayed the project about 10 months, which was a pretty costly mistake, but it's not the first time I've seen it. And so I think collaboration between entities and looking at the end-to-end solution is some of the other areas that I see customers and quite frankly, even the vendors, providing or not providing the right guidance to customers sometimes and not thinking about it. We get siloed in our own world.
So from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you do a lot of consulting during the sales process.
Yeah, I ran my own consulting business for about 5 years, and that's kind of what I did is I helped different integrators build businesses to properly consult customers across the market. And that's, I'm not saying I'm doing anything unique. It just comes from almost 30 years of experience, and throughout my career I've had the benefit of being able to work with enterprise customers on the edge. I've worked with carriers, I've worked with telcos in between, and I've seen it from multiple different vantage points, so that I can better coach a service provider on why their customer is aggravated with service providers in general, as not picking or singling out any one service provider, but they're frustrated because maybe they're not nimble enough, or maybe this or that, or not offering the right services. And then the flip side of that is trying to explain to telcos and telecom companies why a customer behaves the way they do, or what their rationale is, and understanding kind of from both vantage points. So it's been that part of, and getting that experience over my career has been invaluable in being able to give guidance and help kind of look at a big picture solution.
And it's prepared you for the environment, the sales environment that we're in right now, where so many clients, prospects are doing so much more research on their own before they get to you, that in many ways they become more sales allergic than they ever have with all of the self-driven journey. But they still want to speak to experts. So when you can show up and bring decades of deep experience with similar kinds of businesses, similar kinds of infrastructure challenges. Imagine it's a much easier way for you to get the foot in the door. The challenge is being able to take all of your decades of institutional knowledge and package that in a way that a sales development rep or an account executive that maybe is 5 or 10 years into their career can take some of these methodologies and be able to add enough value pre-sales to get their foot in the door early on, enough where they can make a difference.
Yeah, one thing that I'm a big proponent of is the concept of mentoring programs, and traditionally mentoring somebody that's kind of outside of your direct, certainly nobody in your direct chain of command, but across lines of business or across areas is doing a mentoring function, both up and down, being mentored and mentoring people. It's definitely, obviously been able to leverage some of that experience has been helpful. But I look back to when I started. I was, I learned by following those people that had been around and had the experience.
One more area I wanted to ask you about is you mentioned that you're having a lot of conversations in education. You mentioned agriculture. You mentioned service providers. Among those segments, who's the typical kind of stakeholder that you're spending the most time with? Does it vary a lot depending on the size of the environment? Or are you seeing common types of roles that have the most interest in edge infrastructure?
It's interesting. I've seen a pretty good blend of interest in the edge infrastructure across. If you look at education, we talked about already, but the educators are also looking at AI from a different vantage point, right? When you look at OpenAI or ChatGPT and Google's AI platforms, those are public platforms, and educational entities want to look at, can they spin up their own AI environment, let students learn on that, and it's somewhat behind a firewall, so they know exactly what content is there as they're learning it. So there's that aspect. If you look at the edge data center from a healthcare perspective, the amount of information that they have to store, they typically have to store it in a major facility. There's interest clearly from them being able to store it locally, and then municipalities the same thing. They have CJIS information. If they have all their court records and court documents have to be CJIS compliant, and that requires a SOC 2 facility as well. So we're seeing it obviously throughout the municipalities. In enterprise, it's more privatized. So we've talked to some large enterprises that are looking at distribution facilities, and they want to convert their distribution facilities to full AI control, and they're recognizing that they need a lot of compute. So the edge computing for them, not so much a public edge facility. They're looking for more privatized, where they would just deploy an edge compute data center closer to their distribution facility that they could crunch all this data. Research, education, those are all areas they're all looking at, the edge piece. And then the carrier side, what we're seeing, because of the hyperscalers, maybe not so much on the data center component of it, but for edge colocation and relay huts, or what we refer to as ILA sites. The ILA sites are having to become bigger and bigger because the amount of traffic that these hyperscalers are wanting to transport from, if you look at Abilene, for example, that's a huge facility. Those entities are there. They want to transport a lot of data from Abilene to Dallas, Abilene to Denver, and the ILA sites are being outgrown by what they've put in the past. So they're looking at larger and larger facilities for either ILA sites or co-location facilities.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you're approaching the different segments. One thing you mentioned in passing too with the service providers that I'm curious about is most of the co-location operators that I speak with on a regular basis, regardless of their company size, at some point also find having channel partners a productive part of their growth strategy. As AI also building relationships with like managed service providers, integrators, master agents? Or are you focusing more on a direct model?
So far, it's been more of a direct model, but I would imagine as we evolve, as we get more and more penetration, And like Doug will say too, is, we're kind of leading. We feel like we're leading this environment, and there's others that are coming on, and I think the industry as a whole needs more players in this space. So I think as more and more players develop strategies and solutions, I think we'll see more of an indirect model over time. It's a kind of a natural progression. But right now, we're kind of focused on trying to get the edge data centers down to as many locations as possible over the next year or two.
Makes a lot of sense as well, where I see a lot of times companies want to build up a strong, robust internal version of sales, marketing, and services and support before they try to take parts of that and look for additional extensions of that on a partner relationship.
Yeah, I've worked with some OEMs in the past that were primarily a direct model, and they were fairly sizable. And moving from a direct model into a channel model it's a whole different. You really have a whole different thought process and have to think about things differently. And I think it's important, if you're going to move into a channel model, you have to do it in kind of in concert with your sales organization. The salespeople tend to get pretty possessive about their accounts. And they're like, well, I don't need a channel guy to help me this. I got it covered. The reality is, for scalability, the channel's, incredibly important. And if you look at some of the, the very large successful companies out there that have, that managed to grow from a direct model to a channel model and, scale immensely, the channel was a critical factor of that. So I think that's just a natural evolution.
Yeah, for sure. The final area I want to ask you about today is, when you look into your crystal ball about how your role may change in the next 2, 3, 4 years, what is someone leading business development for a company like Duo's Edge AI? How do you anticipate that it might change over the next 2 to 4 years?
Well, that's a loaded question, because I will tell you, I look back in my crystal ball 18, even 12 months ago, maybe 18 months ago, would I have thought that I'd seen what I'm seeing in the data center space? I don't think anybody would have predicted what we're seeing right now. I saw a statistic this week that was actually almost scary for me to look at. The number of projects in the state of Texas alone right now that are either have been announced, slated, or proposed for data centers, just from a power perspective, is equivalent to 2x what we currently produce in the state of Texas from a power side. So that piece of it alone is gonna, I think, it has to get revolutionized, because our power industry cannot keep up with what the demand is. It's funny, my oldest son he just transitioned into a company that they make components for the power industry, and I just talked to him today, and I said, how's it going? He's like, man, we are buried, absolutely buried. He says, I think we're doing something for AWS. I think we're doing something for another hyperscaler. I said, but you're in the power side. He said, yeah, we're doing all kinds of stuff for everybody. It's just crazy. So looking forward, obviously, I think the next 3 to 5 years, I think we're gonna be playing catch up mode and trying to fulfill what all the expectations are on all these projects that are coming in front of us. As we as a country are trying to become the AI leader, or ensure that we're the AI leader, I think it's going to drive a lot of things. The edge compute side, I think, if you look at it, even from going back as early as REA and pushing telephones out to the end users, I think the data center world we're going to see kind of the same thing. And I'm not saying we're going to have a data center in every household, but I think we're going to see edge data centers in communities we never thought we'd ever see one in. And part of that is, scaling these down to make them palatable to go into those markets from a size and scalability, and also being able to deploy them in a quick fashion. So I see the continued growth for the next 3 to 5 years. I don't see any real change. AI, I think we're still, if you look at AI from an adoption perspective, I think we're still relatively small in terms of what the adoption perspective. So compare it to the internet and where we've come in the last 15 or 20 years and from internet and where we are today, it's, I think the horizon is extremely bright. I think we're going to need to skill and train a lot of folks to be prepared to address the market we're facing, for sure.
Yeah, and I always tell people the acid test with all of this is if you're at a family function or barbecue or community event or something like that over the next couple of weeks, and you're hanging around with people that don't work in IT, ask them what they know about AI and what they're following about AI and get their first impressions. And you'd be, even with some of the less technical people in companies, you'd be shocked at how big we assume that everyone knows what we know because of who we hang around with all the time. But yeah, we're still in fairly early innings with a lot of generative AI.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because sometimes I've been married for 25 years and my wife goes, I have a hard time telling people what you do. If they don't, people at church or whatever, it's like, what does your husband do? He sells stuff. But yeah, you're right. There's still a big gap. But what is interesting to see really is the younger generation. They're just immersed in this, right? It's like trying to learn from them and how they learn. It's a different process for sure.
It's the digital natives who never knew life without a smartphone or an iPad. All the kids have been born since like 2010.
Yeah, I know. It's scary.
I wonder what the toy aisle is going to look like at Target, Walmart, or something like that in 20 years when our kids going to still play with Legos. Are still going to play with dolls and cars and board games, and I don't know.
It was interesting.
TBD.
I was speaking with one of my colleagues in the industry, and she had interviewed her grandmother who was 95, and she asked her a question about what was the biggest technological advancement in her lifetime, and she said running water. And it was just like, wow, think about what, from her perspective, and then now look at the technology advancements. It was kind of an eye opener when she said that.
Yeah, it's amazing how much in 2, 3, 4 generations.
Yeah.
Ask kids growing up today if they ever saw a black and white TV or a computer monitor that was orange or green or a dot matrix printer. And I'm on the young side of Gen X. This wasn't that long ago. It was in the 80s, 70s.
I know. It's
crazy times. This has been really, really fascinating. I've spoken with people that are doing a little bit with Edge, but no one that's really specializing in what you're doing and bringing the telecommunications aspect of this, especially to underserved communities in these like tier 3, tier 4 kind of markets that are looking to use technology as an enabler and clearly need the connectivity and the infrastructure to make all of this happen.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun already. It's rewarding. Just seeing the potential of what we're doing and the excitement around what the impact that we're having just in the panhandle of Texas. And it's funny because I've been working up there for 10 years, and that's been kind of an overlooked area from a technology perspective. They're in the 90th percentile in terms of cost, but they're in the 10th percentile in terms of bandwidth and accessibility still. This along with a project that we've been working with one of our partners, FiberLight, they're building a pretty significant fiber network up in the panhandle. It's radically changing things, and it's just seeing the excitement and the impact that it's going to have is it's pretty rewarding to be able to be involved in something like that.
That's terrific. Dave, really appreciate you taking the time today. If someone wants to follow what you're working on or connect with you, learn more about Duos Edge AI, is LinkedIn a good place to send them?
Yeah, absolutely. They can. I try to repost. Obviously, you can follow Duos Edge AI on LinkedIn or myself. I try to repost everything that we do. We've got a lot of activity going on. We've got a great marketing team, but of course, they can go to our website as well. We've got information there, and if anybody has any questions, they're welcome to reach out to me and contact me. I'm more than happy to talk to anyone and answer any questions.
Excellent. And we'll include links to your LinkedIn profile on the Duos Edge AI company page and the website URL and the show notes with the blog post as well, so people can follow and learn more. But yeah, this has been terrific. I've been speaking today with Dave Irek, who is VP of Business Development for Duo's Edge AI. Thanks again, Dave. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's great speaking to you, Joshua. Have a great day.
Likewise.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.